get more done when we work together. Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and you have probably seen the image of two oxen yoked together to pull a heavy load. That yoke is an ancient metaphor for how two distinct groups form separate but interdependent parts of the whole. That is the case with uniformed military service members and DoD federal civilians, even if that connection might not be obvious or harmonious. I mean, these are two large groups. Roughly speaking, you've got like 1.2 million uniformed service members and then something like 700,000 DoD federal employees. Naturally, these civilians and military, they work all around the world on all kinds of different missions that blend together their experience in engineering and logistics, operations, and what have you. But just like a farmer can't plow a straight line if his two oxen don't pull together, the Department of Defense has a hard time of accomplishing its mission if the civilian and the military workforce don't operate in harmony. And so today, what I want to do is I want to point out some places where friction can emerge with the goal of providing both communities, the military and the civilian, with some strategies to help them work together better. Number one is just the cultural perspective of leadership. Military tend to operate in a fairly clear hierarchy with a well-defined chain of command. But paradoxically, a relatively junior military service member may have remarkable decision-making authority within their scope of responsibility. Alternatively, civilians, and particularly those with limited military experience, may have a more collaborative and flexible approach. And that's kind of a nice way of saying they talk about it a lot, but they avoid pinning responsibility for a decision on any one individual. Obviously, those differences can frustrate just about anybody. And so it's not a bad idea to address this up front in the relationship. Maybe even do a couple of, decision-making rehearsals. Make sure everybody understands, who's responsible for making decisions? How much leeway is there for discourse throughout the process? And frankly, when is it time to shut up and color? The second source of frustration, and one that's going to create even more points of friction, is different perceived priorities, or maybe I should say different interpretations of the mission. Military personnel are in constant motion. They PCS frequently. They get promoted and reassigned rapidly. They move from mission to mission. Meanwhile, civilians tend to stay at a specific location longer. They tend to hold a duty for a longer period of time, and they'll perform the same action year after year after year. These differences in timing contribute to a different sense of priorities. With the same mission statement and leadership guidance, military may feel that the civilians are overly slow and cautious. And at the same time, the civilians may feel that the military are kind of haphazard and fixated on short-term goals. What do? Well, you're not going to change those priorities. They show up so consistently across so many organizations because they accurately represent how people think about the world. The trick is to use those different perspectives. When something has to be done in the short term, you put the military against it. When it has to be consistently reported over and over, or it requires years worth of planning, that's going to be a job for the civilians. Oh, and I should point this out. Military are salaried employees who get paid from the first of the month to the last of the month, regardless of how much they work. Government civilians are hourly workers. They work 40 hours a week, and they're entitled to overtime for anything that goes beyond that. Most military don't realize that difference exists, and frankly, they're shocked when they find out. Or maybe I should say, a lot of military get frustrated with civilians who don't want to work unpaid overtime. If you're working together, you gotta understand each other's basic terms of employment. And look, there are ways to work together to get a critical task done, but they rely on that understanding and a degree of trust. Now, I mentioned before that military rotate relatively frequently compared to the civilians, and this has a domino effect on their relationship. First, you'll hear people say that civilians are the institutional knowledge of the organization. But that's only because they're the part of the workforce that rotates slowly, not just because they're civilians. And secondly, that means that the civilians are often responsible for getting the new military up to speed. And that always comes with its own, fish hooks. Many civilians will attempt to set their new leadership on the path that was laid out by their old leadership. They assume that the major changes that their previous leadership forced them to make are important enough that the new leadership is going to continue it. But of course, new leadership often has a mandate to chart a new course for the organization. This becomes particularly challenging whenever that new direction that the new leadership wants to take has some sort of underlying problem. If I had one recommendation for anybody, military or civilian, facing this kind of a situation, it would be this. Drill down to that underlying problem and muster the energy to overcome it. Plenty of military, leaders, teammates show up with what they think are bright new ideas when in reality, those ideas are exactly the same ones that their predecessors had. The mark of a good team is to focus their energy at the critical point to achieve that vision. And then at the end of the day, whether you're military or civilian, you are going to be yoked to that other guy. You are going to have to deal with these issues. In fact, I would suggest that as you rise higher and higher in your career, that these issues are going to become more central to your everyday work, and they're going to become key to demonstrating that you have the potential for greater responsibility. And guess what? We have real enemies, and it ain't each other. So you can poke fun, you can do some creative problem solving, you can have a mutual, if guarded, respect for one another, whatever it takes to generate the level of national security that our nation needs. And now, if you're military and you want to understand those cranky bureaucrats a little better, watch this video. And if you're civilian and you want to understand those cranky colonels, watch this video.